we thought it would be a really great idea if we each made different pamphlets that we could distribute at the Oxfam event, which would be on April 2nd, and pamphlets that would be available for tabling in West Mall later on in the year.
In my pamphlet, I was going to focus on the extractive resources industry, and more specifically, focus on the Extractive Industry Transparency Disclosure Act. This act would force mining businesses to disclose the payments they make to foreign governments, and consequently, hopefully reduce corruption. The act is expected to go through Congress sometime later this year.
And my idea was to focus on information about the Make UT Sweat-Free campaign. And specifically, I wanted to raise student awareness and support for this campaign so that it would encourage President Powers to sign on to something called the Designated Suppliers Plan, which would ensure that all UT apparel is made in factories that enforce labor rights. So basically, places that aren't sweatshops.
During meetings, we discussed planning for Oxfam very briefly in early February, but it wasn't until the end of March when we presented our idea to the president about having a table at Oxfam that was specifically about issues Oxfam supported and not just the Make UT Sweatshop Free campaign, although that would be included at the table.
This table would be the basis of our third project. It would be where we would hand out our pamphlets and raise support for our respective issues.
After initially presenting this idea in our weekly meeting, the real struggle continued outside of the meetings when I repeatedly tried to contact the president about confirmation for the table and my pamphlet. She didn't actually respond until the day of the Oxfam event, and that's why I was rushing around the day of to make 100 copies.
First, I tried to make a t-shirt and a poster design for the Oxfam event, but I never actually finished them because the officers decided that there wasn't enough funding for them. So even though I spent countless hours using Photoshop at PCL trying to figure it out, it was all for nothing. I tried to find other ways to become involved, but I ran into some roadblocks. The president assured me that all the officers had taken care of everything that was really important and that helping out on the day of was more than enough help. During this time, I became a pro at email tag, what with my many attempts to contact both the president and the officer who, in my research notes, I just refer to as the sweatshop guru. Basically because he knows all the information about the Make UT Sweat-Free campaign. But sometimes I was a little confused by the feedback I got from both of them. They took quite a long time to reply and tended to contradict each other, so sometimes I was just a little confused, lost, but I did manage to figure something out in the end, so at least it ended well.
All of the confusion and miscommunication aside, Belgin and I arrived, pamphlets in hand, just before 7 p.m., the designated starting time. However, there were not many people there, and it appeared they were still setting up. We headed over to the Oxfam tables, where we learned that we would be the ones running the activism table by ourselves.
This meant it was our responsibility to get people to sign pre-made letters about various issues, in addition to informing them of why these issues were important and why they should care. Although there were many different issues, more than just our two, we decided to focus on the Make UT Sweat-Free campaign letters and the extractive resources industry ones. Furthermore, this was the first time we were hearing that we were going to be running this table. No one had decided that it would be a good idea to tell us maybe just an hour or so before the event.
Basically, this led us to conclude that the table was sort of an afterthought on the part of the officers, even though this was an Oxfam event, and it would make sense to have a table about Oxfam at their event. Had we been given this information in advance, we could have prepared more and done a better job. However, we did manage to scramble and make the table somewhat successful in the end.
Since we can't control the weather, we were very concerned about the possibility of rain. However, wind proved to be our worst enemy because it was so strong that it tried to blow away all of our pre-made letters, posters, balloons, pins, and pamphlets. Nevertheless, we attempted to counteract this by using rocks, rolls of tape, and rubber band to anchor things to the table. At least until the wind decided to go away, which it did, thankfully.
But perhaps the brightest idea of the night was to place the Oxfam table where all the speaking would be done as close to the speakers as possible. Speakers which would be blasting loud rock music from the bands participating in Oxfam. This was an especially bad idea because it meant that we could barely hear each other, and also that we had to scream at anyone who visited our table asking for more information.
The breakdown in communication between the officers and ourselves was probably one of the biggest problems. We weren't ever included in any of the planning stages of Oxfam or really asked our opinion, so that made it really difficult for us to know just exactly how we could help and just what we could expect to do on the day of. It was all very confusing. But somehow it all worked out in the end, so yay.